Why am I here? What's my life purpose? Why should I care about anything if everything is just going to end? The weight of his thoughts was so intense that he found solace in sleep, because it provided temporary relief from the constant barrage of questions about his purpose and existence. In his essay, A Confession, Tolstoy expressed how, during this time, he had to trick himself into not taking his own life, as nihilism consumed him. As his thoughts spiraled, he became like an emotional toddler, constantly asking himself, why? Why life? Why existence? Why death? He believed there was something fundamentally wrong with his soul. Tolstoy chose to seek meaning, exploring almost every ideology. First, he turned to philosophy and science. Tolstoy read the works of multiple philosophers, including Solomon, Socrates, and Buddha, but he did not find complete answers in any of them. He felt that these teachings ultimately led to one simple conclusion. Happy is he who has not been born, death is better than life, and one must free oneself from life. On the other hand, Tolstoy also explored science, which he believed offered knowledge, but found little solace there. He viewed Darwinism as embodying nihilism, suggesting that humans are nothing but an accidental creation in the universe. According to biology, we are merely lumps of energy, valuable only when we are healthy, and destined for death once our cells grow old. To Tolstoy, science offered no comfort regarding life's purpose or how one could live a happy life free from the existential thoughts that haunted him. Disillusioned with both philosophy and science, Tolstoy turned to studying and observing the people around him. After much reflection, he concluded that for people in his circle, there were 4 ways out of the terrible position in which we are all placed. The first way is accepting the absurdity of life. I find a lot of commonality between Albert Camus' philosophy and Tolstoy's perspective on existence, especially in their shared view of absurdism. Tolstoy observed that one way people cope with the absurdity of life is simply by ignoring it. They do nothing about it. They don't overthink it. Life is absurd, so what? They just live it. Camus also argued that instead of succumbing to despair or nihilism in the face of absurdity, we should adopt an attitude of defiance and resilience. The key is to keep a mindset of, so what? So what if you can't find the answer? Just go have a coffee with your wife and forget about it. However, Tolstoy didn't think this could be a lasting solution. How can you stay ignorant when you have a fully functioning mind, constantly pushing you to think about your existence? The deaths of loved ones or personal struggles can make these thoughts even harder to ignore. Eventually, the weight of nihilism overtakes, and absurdism no longer works. So, while he observed that some people cope this way, Tolstoy didn't believe it was a path to lasting peace. This led Tolstoy to observe a second group of people who sought peace in another way, Epicureanism. Tolstoy noticed that some people turned to a life of indulgence, filling it with pleasures to distract themselves from the suffering and uncertainty of existence. They pursued material wealth, relationships, and entertainment to escape the fear of death and the meaninglessness of life. However, Tolstoy criticized this approach for being ultimately unsatisfying. While indulgence in pleasure may offer temporary relief, it's fleeting and fails to address the deeper questions of meaning. For Tolstoy, living solely for pleasure results in an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. No amount of indulgence can resolve the ultimate existential questions. In Tolstoy's view, Epicureanism was like the drops of honey in the parable of the man in the well, sweet for a moment, but ultimately just a distraction from the harsh reality of life. The third group Tolstoy observed were those who, in the face of life's struggles, lacked the strength to carry on, but have strength to end the silly joke. They were overwhelmed by the absurdity of existence and saw no way out. This is a path that Tolstoy himself could not embrace. He saw some people go so far as to consider ending their lives, but he believed that this, too, was not the solution. And yes, please never ever do that. If you're in an existential crisis, keep moving forward. Don't let it consume you. Instead, search with an open mind. No progress. The individual is fully aware of life's absurdity and the existential challenges, but remains stuck in a standstill, unable to seek purpose or hope. This state of limbo leaves them emotionally and spiritually paralyzed. They remain suspended in their suffering, with no movement in any direction, and no real possibility of finding peace or meaning in their lives. He was struck by how the peasants, despite facing immense hardships, maintained an unwavering faith in God. This belief seemed to give them purpose and resilience, even in the face of suffering. However, Tolstoy's encounter with the faith of the poor challenged his perspective. He began to see that life could not be fully understood through reason alone. It required belief in something greater than the material world. This realization marked a profound turning point for Tolstoy. Although he had not initially believed in God, he began to recognize that faith, particularly in the infinite, was the key to transcending the limitations of the finite world. The suffering and struggles of human life were temporary, but the eternal presence of God offered a sense of purpose that could provide meaning beyond the fleeting nature of existence. In this newfound understanding, faith became not just an intellectual concept, but a way of enduring life's challenges and finding meaning in the face of suffering. Even if his rational mind saw faith as a leap without tangible evidence, Tolstoy came to understand it as the only path to true peace and purpose.
So I'm going to be trying to give you a general overview of the Baha'i faith, and it does bear noting that there are no clergy in the Baha'i faith, so I'm just a regular Baha'i, just like all of the other regular Baha'is on the planet, and I have my own perspective, my own way of seeing the world and interpreting the Baha'i holy writings. There are no rabbis or priests or gurus or mullahs in the Baha'i faith, no intermediaries between the common worshiper or devotee and the holy writings or God. So before we get to the cosmology of the Baha'i faith, let's take a quick look at some of the other ones. What is the cosmology of atheism, for instance? Probably some words and thoughts come immediately to mind, like science and evolution, the Big Bang. So the atheist universal belief system, or cosmology, in broad strokes, is that there was a big empty space and then there was some kind of explosion from a tiny speck, and within seconds, atoms erupted and formed into molecules and elements, and all of this energy and matter burst forth from this primal point, eventually becoming galaxies and solar systems and planets like ours. Energy, matter, plus apparently dark matter and dark energy, and time itself were all created in one random explosion over 13 billion years ago. So our watery mud ball Earth was spinning around our sun for a few billion years, and then something happened. I don't know, maybe a lightning bolt hit an ocean or a meteorite fell in and created the first tiny specks of molecular life. The specks eventually became guppies, which eventually became tadpoles, and eventually crawled on land and became pterodactyls and marmosets and bunnies and apes and then human beings. Voila, evolution. Science is then the driving force behind the universe, which has no underlying or objective meaning, according to an atheist or materialist. The consciousness that we are experiencing right now is simply a result of our highly evolved and very large brains. There's not any real difference between us and monkeys. We just have larger brains that have evolved into being able to know that we will someday die. Brains that can create beautiful works of art, fall in love. Our highly evolved consciousness is simply a matter of more evolved gray matter. The only meaning we find in life is purely subjective and personal. If our work gives us meaning, or our family, or children, or hobbies, or nature, great. Go for that thing. There's not supernatural creator God, as his existence can't be scientifically verified, and therefore there's no objective moral truth. Now, let's think about what a Christian cosmology might look like. Forgive me for being reductive or simplistic with either of these belief systems, but in a nutshell, there were a number of Jewish prophets every few hundred years in and around Judea and Palestine, and then all of a sudden, God sent his only begotten Son. Jesus Christ was born of the virgin birth, was baptized, saw the Holy Spirit manifested in a dove, and preached the gospel, performed many miracles, and eventually was put to death. The only way to the Father is through him, and he died for our sins on the cross, and then was resurrected 3 days later and went back up to be with his Father. Someday he will return and take true believers with him and or rebuild the kingdom of God on earth. The Christian universe view holds that salvation of one's immortal soul comes from believing in Christ, being baptized, and that good Christians eventually go to heaven and that most others go to hell. Now, there's a lot more to Christianity than that, just as there's more to atheism than what I previously described, but it gives you a wide-angle lens view of what they believe. Now, let's take a look at the Baha'i cosmology. I'll start with one word, one name, Baha'u'llah. Baha'is follow the teachings of Baha'u'llah, who was the founder of the Baha'i faith. He lived not long ago, actually, in the mid-1800s, and was a Persian nobleman who turned away from his high-status position and instead became a great spiritual teacher. The name Baha'u'llah means the glory of God. In Arabic, Baha is glory and Allah is God, of course. It's those two words kind of mashed up together. And this is what Baha'u'llah taught. Baha'is believe there is only one God. Call him or her or it whatever you like, Allah, Jehovah, Gaia, the Great Spirit, but all people who worship are praying to the same God, an all-loving, all-knowing creative force in us and around us, as well as in an infinite amount of other universes beyond this material one. So, point number one, there is only one God. This is the first key aspect of the Baha'i cosmology. One God, remember that. The next aspect is that there is only one religion. That's right, Baha'u'llah taught that there is, in actuality, only one religion. Now you might say, hey, that sounds crazy. There's dozens of religions and they all believe in hundreds of very different things. How can that be? Well, Baha'u'llah taught that there is only one faith ever unfolding as revealed by that one God that I previously mentioned. This one faith is gradually revealed and updated by certain divine teachers who come along every 500 or 1,000 years or so. You've heard of many of them before. Holy men or prophets or messengers that go by the names of Abraham, Zoroaster, Krishna, Moses, the Buddha, Jesus and Muhammad, the forerunner of the Baha'i faith, the Bab, and now Baha'u'llah. Think of it this way. You have a computer that gets various updates to its operating system, right? You've got Cougar and then Leopard and then Mountain Tiger and Mountain Leopard 3.5, etc. They all build on one another. When you get a new operating system, it's an update to what was there previously. Same with iPhones. You had the 3 and then the 3S and the 5 Plus and now the 7 or 8 or whatever phone is next. Well, it's the same thing with religion. Just as humanity needs to progress materially, socially, and technologically, we as a species need to progress spiritually as well. God takes care of this by sending his specially appointed messengers and teachers to update his message or his operating system. Baha'is call this idea of a gradually unfolding faith of God progressive revelation. Baha'u'llah calls this one faith that is progressively revealed the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. And eventually, a long time from now, this Creator will send more holy teachers for humanity's spiritual guidance. Now, it would be easy to look at the differences in the various religious faiths that these men founded. There are certainly a great deal of differences between, say, Islam and Buddhism. But if you really look at what the prophets themselves taught, what they specifically said, or what they were supposed to have said, remember, people usually didn't write down what they were saying for hundreds of years after they died, there are way more similarities than differences. What are some of these universal truths taught by these divine manifestations of God? Well, how about the idea that we should all love one another? That's pretty universal through all religions. All you need is love. The Golden Rule exists in some form in literally every major world religion. What about the idea that there is a reality greater than our merely physical life, that there is some kind of afterlife, that our reality is not that we are just bodies in three-dimensional space, but that we have a soul or spirit that continues on its journey after the lease on our meat suits runs out? That this material world is kind of an illusion and that there is a deeper reality above, beyond, and behind this physical veil. This goes hand in hand with the concept that we have dual natures. Although the physical world has its importance, the pursuits of selfish animal, sensual, or ego-focused desires and fulfillments of our baser needs is pointless and will not ultimately make us happy. But if we pursue spiritual service to others and goodly deeds and compassionate acts, they will lead to true fulfillment and spiritual bliss. Prayer and meditation. Those are two universal actions for enlightenment that run through all the world's major religions. The concept that there is a divinely ordained idea of right and wrong, a morality, as it were, good deeds and bad deeds, and that there are reverberations and repercussions for both. The list of commonalities goes on and on. So what did Baha'u'llah, the most recent prophet of God, teach? Well, I'd like to go to a metaphor about these prophets that is really interesting. Baha'u'llah calls these holy teachers divine physicians. He says this, and it's kind of a long quote, so get ready. You ready? Okay, here we go. The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of humankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age has its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present-day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. So as I see it, in a nutshell, he's saying that these divine physicians come down to earth at a specific time and place and do two things. They diagnose the illness for the time and place, and they prescribe a cure, a spiritual cure for what the world needs at that time, just like a doctor. But, and it's the last sentence of the quote that I love most, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in. The last sentence is a command. Be anxiously concerned, and basically focus your conversations and actions on today's urgent needs and look for solutions. So, and here's my question for you. If you were a divine physician sent down to diagnose the world's spiritual problems in this modern age of humanity, what would you come up with? And what would you prescribe for that illness? I'll give you a second. Okay, time's up. I'm guessing you might have thought about all the disunity on the planet today, right? Differences of race, class, economics, gender issues, politics. Well, this brings us to the main spiritual teaching of Baha'u'llah. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens. In other words, the third major key point of the Baha'i cosmology, one humanity. The differences that divided us for eons must be healed, as we are, in this day and age, one human family, and need to act like it. Today, about 1 billion people go to bed hungry each night. If your brother or sister or family member went to bed hungry, would you allow it? Racism is probably something that popped up in your brain as you were ruminating before. The elimination of racial prejudice is one of the most central tenets of the Baha'i faith, and a must for healing humanity and uniting us all. And that goes hand in hand with another big issue that probably came up for you in your personal diagnosis. Economic injustice, the disparity between rich and poor. Right now, 26 men own as much wealth as half the planet. That's 3.7 billion people. Now, there's nothing wrong with those 26 men starting awesome businesses, but this statistic is just plain wrong. It's unjust and unsustainable. It's also unjust and unsustainable that women are treated like second-class citizens, subjugated in the developing world as well as in the West. Baha'u'llah was perhaps the first spiritual teacher to advocate for gender equality and justice. And this was back in the 1860s in the Middle East, a truly revolutionary act. Baha'u'llah also addressed the need for science and religion to be in harmony. He said they were like the two wings of a bird, and we need both wings to fly. Baha'u'llah once wrote, "Religion without science is superstition. Science without religion is materialism." So Baha'u'llah, Baha'is believe, is the divine physician for this day and age, the prophet for the modern world.
Welcome to I Am Your Target Demographic, and welcome to our newest video on world religions. Today we're covering what's called the Baha'i Faith, and the people practicing it called Baha'is. What is this religion? What do people practicing this faith believe? This is a superficial video, as you can tell by the length of the video, but hopefully this can help give you a zoomed out summary, and if you find it interesting, you can do some deep dives into the parts that intrigue you. The Baha'i Faith is a relatively new one, dawning in the 1800s. A few key figures laid the foundation for the religion, including the founder of a religion called Babism, an independent religion springing out of Islam, just as Christianity was in relation to Judaism. The founder, a young Persian merchant named Sayyid Ali Muhammad, took the title of the Bab, meaning the gate in Arabic. His purpose was to announce and prepare the world for the coming of a manifestation from God, who would usher in an age of peace and justice, which has been promised in most of the world's religions. This can be somewhat equated to the work of John the Baptist, who was preparing for the arrival of Jesus in Christian religions. The Bab's revelation was, after Islam, the next in a series of progressive revelations from God that begun millennia ago and have included multiple messengers, such as Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad. The Bab's revelation was the completion of the prophetic cycle and the forerunner of a universal prophetic cycle. I could do a whole video on just this foundation, but it ultimately ended in the execution of the Bab, killed by the Persian government alongside thousands of his followers. We then have a man named Baha'u'llah, who claimed that he received a new revelation from God, and he claimed to be a messenger as outlined by the Bab before him. This was a blasphemy against his primarily Islamic state, so he was banished. He received many revelations and messages, reinforcing that he was on a vital mission. He was imprisoned on and off again for the rest of his life, eventually passing away at 74 in prison. Throughout his life, he wrote letters and books recounting his revelations, which would form the foundation for the Baha'i Faith. His son makes up the third central figure, named Abdul Baha, who took these teachings and began to spread them across the globe, responsible for forming the body of what has become the Baha'i Faith. While sprouting from Islam, you'll see that the Baha'i Faith is a very different and unique religion now. Some compare it to the way Christianity evolved from Judaism to become its own unique identity, but still holding many historical and cultural facets intact. So let's look at what the Baha'i Faith believes. A major aspect is this idea of messengers, or sometimes called manifestations of God. The three big foundational principles of the Baha'i Faith revolve around the unity of God, that He is an unknowable essence beyond any description, the unity of religion, that they are all working to develop moral qualities in people, and the unity of humanity, meaning that things like racism and sexism have absolutely no place in our world, and each person has been created equal in the likeness of God. This all culminates in a unified world order where people from all nations and across all classes can prosper. The Baha'i Faith has been at the forefront of interfaith efforts and promoting coexistence mentalities in an effort to bridge these religions that are often at odds. What does the Baha'i Faith say about God? As I said before, He is unknowable, they believe, just as a table can't comprehend the carpenter who made it. All-powerful, all-knowing, eternal. They also believe God to be inaccessible, though they believe He showed purpose in our creation and He delivers new revelations through these messengers. Now, followers of the Baha'i Faith do still pray, but they pray in order to achieve a spiritual state and to feel closer to God, to better their own conduct. The Baha'i Faith is also fairly unique among most religions that it has no clergy, again valuing unity amongst its members versus a hierarchy. The only authority, so to speak, is what's called the Universal House of Justice, created to settle any disagreements or attempts to fracture the religion. This body is 9 individuals elected every 5 years. Physically, this building resides in Israel on Mount Carmel. Across the world, there are spiritual assemblies, which are responsible for the everyday affairs of their members at local and national levels. Something is working when it comes to spiritual outreach, as the Baha'i Faith is considered one of the fastest growing religions. somewhere between 7 and 9 million members worldwide. Many people come to this religion because of its focus on inclusivity, including its gender views. The Baha'i Faith likens man and woman to the two wings of a bird, each essential, and balance is crucial in order to fly.
Or Zoroaster, who was born around 1200 to 1000 BCE. At 30, Zarathustra, who was born into a polytheistic family, had a vision which caused him to reject polytheism and teach his people to worship only one god, Ahura Mazda. Zoroastrians often refer to themselves as the first monotheistic religion. One of Zoroastrianism's core teachings is that there is an eternal cosmic struggle between good and evil, between darkness and light. Consequently, in antiquity it was called the good religion because it commanded good of its adherents. By the 5th century BCE, Zoroastrianism had become the major religion of Persia and eventually spanned much of Asia, Africa, and Europe. Some believe Zoroastrianism influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as each focus on monotheism, a judgment day, the heavenly reward, and the importance of an ethical life. Practicing Zoroastrians pray 5 times a day, traditionally standing in front of sacred fire, a symbol of God. Their temples are called fire temples, where a flame is kept constantly burning.
Conferences aim to prepare all those well-wishers of humanity who are engaged in and committed to building vibrant communities as we prepare to enter a new stage in our endeavour.
Biodiversity is a term that represents the total variety of all life on Earth. That's a big thing to sum up. Thousands of different wild habitats, millions of different species, billions of different individuals, and the trillions of different characteristics they all have. The total biodiversity of our planet is immense. Which is a good thing, because the more biodiversity, the more secure all life on Earth is, including ourselves. Only when life is at its most varied, vigorous, biodiverse, can we hope to thrive. We may not know it, but we need towering forests across 1/3 of the land surface to lock away carbon and keep the climate stable. We need millions of pollinators and billions of soil organisms and megatons of plankton to keep the food we eat in supply. We need strange plants deep in jungles to create our medicines, and coral reefs and mangrove swamps to protect the coasts we depend upon. Our planet's biodiversity provides all the things we need for free. But it will only do so if there's lots of it, and at the moment it's under attack. In the last 50 years, our activities have dramatically reduced biodiversity across the globe. We've snuffed out habitats, reduced populations of wild animals by 60%, and even driven whole species extinct. The number of lions in Africa has dropped by 65%. The number of individual flying insects in Europe has dropped by 75%. The number of bluefin tuna in the Pacific has dropped by 95%. Biodiversity is dropping everywhere and fast. This is catastrophic for nature and therefore ourselves. We talk about climate change a lot, but biodiversity loss is as important an issue. How do we stop this loss of life? How do we ensure that biodiversity, our planet's vital statistic, begins to increase again? In fact, we already know exactly what to do.
The challenges facing our world are growing all the time. How do we build stronger economies with equal opportunities for all? How do we build a sustainable world for generations to come? How do we protect our cities and harness the power of technology for our common benefit? Humanity has always been good at forward thinking. We will make sense of the problems of tomorrow. Inequality, sustainability, urbanization, the gender gap, and the demographic time bomb.
I would describe the Fourth Industrial Revolution actually quite similarly to how I would describe the past three, and that is technology that leads to massive gains in productivity. And massive gains in productivity mean substantial improvements to everyone's quality of life.
The world has been through revolutions before. The advent of mechanization, then electronics, then the digital revolution, all profoundly changed the world's economies. But this revolution could be even more disruptive.
I think in previous revolutions, you could really talk about them as industrial revolutions. What was changing was how things were made, factories, industry, often heavy industry in particular. Here you're seeing transformation across really a whole range of not just industry, but services and the creation of whole new business models that didn't exist before.
What's different a little bit about this particular revolution is that it gets into a whole range of things that people only thought were ever only possible for humans to do. Jobs that were human jobs before aren't going to be human jobs anymore.
At the heart of this fourth revolution is artificial intelligence, the ability of machines to match and perhaps one day surpass the cognitive ability of their human creators.
What's happening now is a big deal. It is making a big difference in the way people live, the way people interact with each other. It is sort of obliterating distance. It is, in some cases, removing humans from tasks that we once thought were the sole province of the human mind. These analytic tasks that we thought only a human brain could do, we're suddenly finding that algorithms can do, that machines can do.
These are early days in the brave new world of artificial intelligence. But the potential benefits are vast and sees a world where potentially hundreds of millions of skilled workers are out of a job.
I would say that if you look far enough into the future, there is no job anywhere in our economy. There's nothing that anyone does that is completely safe, and that includes even artists and novelists and the kinds of jobs that you would imagine right now are completely beyond the scope of artificial intelligence. Millions and millions of those jobs are going to be lost, and it's unlikely that enough jobs are going to be created to absorb all of those workers. Some of the language translation things that have been demonstrated are truly remarkable. Imagine if anyone in any country who speaks any language would now be able to do any job because we have perfect machine translation in real time between languages. So, that has real implications for the job market, obviously.
We may already be starting to see the effect on the wider economy. In the first decade of this century, the net total number of jobs created in the United States was 0. A revolution on this scale wouldn't just transform an economy, it would have immense implications for our society.
We could really have just what you might call inequality on steroids. The very wealthy people who own all this technology are going to do extraordinarily well. You would have the potential for civil unrest, perhaps even riots or massive crime waves. In the United States, during the Great Depression, we had an unemployment rate of about 25%. And back then, there were many people genuinely concerned that that would result in the collapse of both democracy and capitalism.
This situation amounts to just about the end of the world as we know it, a science fiction nightmare straight from the movies.
There are some very prominent thinkers, like, for example, Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, who have raised genuine fears about the potential for advanced artificial intelligence. And their concern is that someday we're going to build a super intelligent machine. Imagine a machine that's 100 or maybe 1,000 times smarter than any living person. What would that system think? How would it act? Would it have a use for us? It might decide that we're simply a burden. It might decide to just get rid of us. So it could potentially present an existential threat.
This is the age of the city. For the first time in human history, more people live in urban than rural settlements. The world's urban population is growing by 70 million people each year. 301 cities account for 50% of global GDP. This will rise to 66% by 2025. So if we don't get things right in our cities, then the consequences for humanity are profound.
Cities are critically important to the global economy and to progress in the global economy. Cities can be sources of chaos as well as development.
This dual personality of cities is what makes them so alluring and so vital. They can be dangerous places, but cities are where fortunes can be made.
One of the primary factors driving urbanization is opportunity. You live on a farm and you're growing crops, you don't have a lot of opportunity. You see a bustling, growing city, your friends are moving there, they're getting jobs in offices, maybe jobs in a manufacturing center. There's restaurants, there's culture, there's life. This is attractive. This is attractive and something you want to be a part of.
And everything is relative. They'll have greater access to schools, greater access to healthcare, greater access to employment, and a much less vulnerable economic life.
In 1900, 12 of the world's biggest cities were in North America or Europe. 100 years later, this number had fallen to just 2. Most of the biggest cities of the future will be in the developing economies of Asia and Africa.
Most of the growth in cities is going to be in China, India, and Nigeria. Those 3 countries alone will account for 37% of the world's urban population. Just staggering numbers. Here's an example: Lagos, the biggest city in Nigeria. Its population every year is adding the equivalent of the population of Boston.
Managing megacities is one of the great challenges facing the world. This is Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Nearly 12 million people crowd into its metro area. It is beautiful and vibrant, but it also has its problems. Crime, inequality, and poverty. Alessandra Orofino is an urban activist and thinker who has lived and worked in megacities on 3 different continents. She has worked with the United Nations on its Sustainable Development Goals, and founded the groundbreaking Meu Rio, an NGO that uses data gathered from citizens to raise campaigns and solve thorny issues posed by the rapid growth of the city. Meu Rio has 170,000 activists, and Alessandra hopes it can become a model for other rapidly growing cities around the globe. Slums are a result of rapid, unplanned expansion. Today, an estimated 863 million people live in slums. If the 104 million slum dwellers in India were a separate nation, they would be the 13th most populous country in the world. But slums are not always hopeless places.
The poor are not just sitting, waiting for the government to do something for them, they're creating their own urban environments.
The organizations that have a lot of power in our world, the elected government, big companies, the education structure, the medical systems, all of these things are really dominated by men at the top. And that's largely a result of the history of the 20th century and before that. And it is taking a while for women to break that, what we call the glass ceiling, but at the same time, it's taking a while for the whole society to adjust to seeing men and women as equal actors at the top of any of these institutions.
Nearly 100 years after women in the United States were guaranteed the right to vote, the gender gap remains an issue in every corner of the world. And closing it has become more than just an issue of fairness. It has become an economic imperative, debated at Davos and in boardrooms across the world.
There's no global issue that would not be helped by advancing women or achieving equality. We want a world in which every human being, boys and girls, has the right and the ability to live up to his or her God-given potential. And what we have is a world in which far more men have that ability than women do. And I still believe that women and men can do that. I think there's nothing that stops us in principle from doing that. But what I now say is we have to make really big changes still if we're going to get there. Because as work is currently structured, as we think about careers currently structured, far too many people do have to make a choice, and far too many of those people are women. You have to be accustomed to seeing men as the primary caregivers of young children, and men have to understand that they're just as good as women at this, and even more important, or equally important in many ways, as a Finnish CEO said to me, the head of a big Finnish company, he said, now when someone comes, a young man who hasn't taken their paternity leave, I wonder about their character.
The situation was this. It was around the year 600 AD, long before the modern convenience of plumbing. And when a woman awoke in the middle of the night with the urge to relieve herself, she would have to walk out past the outskirts of the city and into the wild by herself for privacy. Believe it or not, a group of men actually began to see an opportunity in women's nightly treks and started to linger at the outskirts of the city, their identities hidden in the dark, watching. And a verse was revealed for the Quran, the Muslim holy book. O Prophet, it reads, tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves their garments. This is better, so that they not be known and molested. Basically, the verse advises that all women dress similarly, so that they can't be picked out from one another, zeroed in on, and attacked. After all, haven't we all come to assume that a Muslim woman must veil? That veiling is a requirement of her faith. There's even a term that we've all come to associate with the Muslim woman's veil, an Arabic term that we've all heard used whether or not we've been aware of it. Hijab. A verse was sent down asking that women use this scarf or any other garment to cover the breasts. And that's it. That's basically all there is in the Quran concerning how a woman should dress. Turns out God doesn't give a bullet point of all the parts on a woman's body that he wants hidden from view. And in fact, it might be argued, and it is argued. I cannot stress enough that it is argued by many Muslim scholars that the reason these verses were left intentionally vague is so that a woman could choose for herself how to dress according to her specific culture and the progression of time. Seems to me that if fundamentalists want to return current Muslim society to 600 AD, it might be a huge step forward. Progress. But we still have to answer an important question. If not from Islamic history, and if not from the Quran, how is it that we, in the modern era, have come to associate Muslim women with hijab, with being separated out from society, secluded and isolated, barred from the most basic human rights? I hope it's not any surprise to you that this isn't by accident. For the past few decades, the very people who have been given the important task of reading and interpreting the Quran in a variety of different Muslim communities, certain clerics have been inserting a certain meaning into those 3 verses concerning women. For instance, that verse I told you about earlier. O prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves their garments. This is better, so that they not be known and molested. Some clerics, not all, some clerics have added a few words to that, so that in certain translations of the Quran, that verse reads like this. O prophet, tell your wives, your daughters, and the women of the believers to draw upon themselves their garments. Parentheses. A garment is a veil that covers the entire head and the face, the neck, the breasts, all the way down to the ankles and all the way to the wrists. Everything on a woman's body is exposed except for one eye, because she must see where she is headed. And the hands must be covered in gloves. Because, of course, there were certainly a lot of gloves back in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Etc., 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 on and on and on, end of parentheses, so that she not be known and molested. And what these so-called clerics have concluded, based on these types of insertions, is that a woman only has one function. To understand what that function is, all you have to do is read some of the fatwas, or legal rulings, that these so-called clerics have actually gone ahead and issued. Let me give you a sampling. A woman need only finish elementary school before she gets married, which puts her what? At the ripe old age of 11, 12 years old. A woman cannot fulfill her spiritual obligations to God until she first fulfills her physical obligations to her husband. If he desires her while she sits on the mount of a camel, she should submit. Does this sound like God's will to you? Does this sound like scripture? Or does this sound strangely, uncomfortably erotic, like the worst kind of misogynist fantasy? Are these so-called clerics and the fundamentalists and extremists who support them truly purifying Islam from within, bringing it back to its intended form? Or are these men no different from those men standing out in the dark at the outskirts of the city, eager to prey upon a woman?
I am pleased now to read the following letter from the President of the United States. I am pleased to send greetings to the American members of the Baha'i community and to the millions of Baha'is around the world as you mark the 100th anniversary of the passing of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of your faith. As many of you gather in New York for your World Congress, or meet in other places of joyful celebration, I know that you are mindful of fellow believers who are being denied the religious freedom and tolerance that are central to Baha'i teachings. In numerous statements and congressional resolutions, the United States has repeatedly expressed the hope that Baha'is in Iran, the birthplace of your faith, will be permitted to practice their religion as guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Baha'i teachings on religious tolerance, the unity of mankind, the elimination of prejudice, equality of the sexes, and universal peace embody principles that all people of goodwill admire and support. As you salute the life and writings of Baha'u'llah, I join with you in praying that we may see the realization of these fundamental principles in every land.
The community at all levels, local, national, continental, and international, will exert immense effort to spread across the planet the name of the world reformer, Baha'u'llah, that hearts may be attracted and minds illumined. But we speak of a proclamation which has more to do with deeds than words. And in this regard, we must everywhere in our world community attain a new awareness of the urgency of the times and of our sacred duties towards the promised one of all ages.
All of us in this gathering are poignantly aware that the achievements we celebrate have in considerable part been won by the sacrifices of our fellow believers in Iran. Sacrifices of well-being, of opportunity, of education, of possessions, of life itself. If there is one unwavering message that has come out of Iran over the past terrible 13 years, it is this: that we must not, for 1 minute, allow any grief to shadow the Baha'i world's joy over the breathtaking victories that these sacrifices have purchased.
It is not just another revelation in the whole series of successive revelations educating mankind and taking him on to his ultimate destiny. It is the most great revelation at the most great time in history. Everything in the Baha'i revelation is of the most great. Think of it, we have two manifestations of God to proclaim it. It was the Bab himself who prepared the way for Baha'u'llah by releasing into the world that great spiritual force which can only come from a manifestation of God, and which changed that bad old, sad old, crystallized, nasty old world of tyranny and oppression and poverty, prejudice, which culminating befittingly, as our own Dr. Esselmont quoted from Carlyle, in the French Revolution. That event, right at the end of the 18th century, was the trumpet blast for the new age of mankind, the day of God, when God's great bounties are poured out in full measure upon the entire human race. It is to the Bab that we owe the explanation of this wonderful covenant which shall not be broken, and this great day which shall not be followed by night. It was the Bab who explained to us that daytime is when the manifestation of God is on earth. That's when the sun is shining. Nighttime is the period between the ascension of a manifestation of God and the appearance of the next one. So that after the crucifixion of Christ, until the year 622, that was a nighttime in human life. And from the ascension of Muhammad until the appearance of the Bab, 1200 years and more was a nighttime in which the great civilization of Islam rose and declined. The civilization of Christendom came out of its dark ages and rose and declined to the end of the 18th century. And when mankind entered this period of chaos and confusion and terrorism and violence and breakdown of all the sanctions and subtleties and laws of human existence, make no mistake, dear friends, it is the revelation of Baha'u'llah which has caused this great confusion and chaos in the world. You may document that from his letter to Queen Victoria. The world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Mankind's ordered life hath been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. The like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed and have not yet seen it. We are hopeful of the future. We know that it's going to be wonderful, but no one has experienced it yet. It is entire speculation and resting upon the promises of God. The Bab released into the human aura, that spiritual world in which we live and are unconscious of generally. He released the remaining 25 letters of knowledge. You know there are 27 letters of knowledge, and until the time of the Bab, God had only given us 2 of them. And it was the Bab who released the remaining 25, and therefore sparked off and sponsored that explosion of knowledge and invention and exploration and scientific investigation and social reform which took place in the 19th century. I ask you to think of the tremendous difference between the time of Baha'u'llah and the Bab and today. Baha'u'llah never rode on a train. He never rode in a motor car. I'm fairly certain he never pressed a switch to turn on light. His travels during those appalling banishments were done on horseback or on foot, from Tehran to Baghdad, and on that 1,000-mile journey across the plains of Ottoman Turkish Empire to Constantinople, on foot and by horseback. It is true that from Gallipoli to Egypt and Haifa, he traveled by steamer. But at that time, steam was just beginning to win its battle over wind, but he still sailed from Haifa to the most great prison in a sailing boat. The technical revolution which took place was due to this new power of mankind's intellect and invention to discover all the secrets of the material universe. But my friends, the social condition of the time was even worse. At the beginning of the 19th century, such concepts as world order or peace or brotherhood of man were either in the realm of science fiction or poetry. And that went on into the 20th century when people like H.G. Wells and Bergson and other Jules Verne and other writers of the early 20th century foresaw or were generally considered as seers when they talked about the brotherhood of man. But you think, when Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 in Europe, the Western world, it was if a poor man stole a loaf of bread, he could be hanged and his body exposed on a gibbet on a hill. If a poor woman couldn't pay the rent, she was deported to one of the great penal colonies, either of Australia or the southern states of America. The middle of the century, although it was lit up by a host of wonderful reformers, Lincoln, Wilberforce, Shaftesbury, Fry, Howard of penal reform, and beginnings of factory acts, was not adequate to give mankind the vision of a new world, that the exploration of the planet, the inventions of technique and so forth, they gave mankind greater command over the sources and the powers of nature. Instead of relying only on muscle power or wind power, at last technical energy was available to mankind. But you consider, even later, by the time Baha'u'llah was beginning to make his proclamation, around the late 1860s and early 70s, when he addressed the kings and rulers and religious leaders of mankind, even by then, his teachings were anathema. The oneness of mankind, hopeless. People didn't want it. Equality of women, no, poor creatures, we can't let them have the same stuff as men. It was an impossible program which he offered to mankind. They rejected it or ignored it, and as you know, as a result, the present chaos and confusion overtook the entire human race when the leaders had thought they were well on the way to establishing their own particular brand of world order or peace under the sovereignty and dominion of one particular race, perhaps. But this chaos and this confusion, which Baha'u'llah himself foresaw and foretold again in that wonderful letter to Queen Victoria, the signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned, and much as the prevailing order appears to be lamentably defective, well, that bad old moribund old order has gone, and we are now in this torrential discord with Baha'u'llah there, riding the whirlwind and directing the storm. There is no doubt of the outcome, my friends. But this brings me to another point about the covenant of Baha'u'llah. There are two events simultaneous and almost synonymous. The ascension of Baha'u'llah and the inception of his covenant take place exactly at the same times. This is why there was never a hiatus, why the day was never to be followed by night, because daytime is when the sun is shining. Nighttime is when we depend on the moon and the stars and, the institutions and the leaders of the dispensations. Not so in this most great dispensation. The covenant of Baha'u'llah is in effect the extension of himself and his power and his authority right through the dispensation to guide and maintain and order the establishment and pursuit of God's kingdom on the planet. The center of that covenant, Abdul-Baha, has produced, again, the most great document, the greatest document the human race has ever seen as a document. Not only is it sacred text, but the Will and Testament of Abdul-Baha is undoubtedly the greatest document that the human race will ever produce, for it is the very charter of God's own kingdom. Now, friends, in that soul-stirring message from the Universal House of Justice, you heard them speak of the urgency of the times. It seems that there are a great many urgencies facing the human race today and facing the Baha'i community too. I feel we ought to dwell on two of those urgencies. The one is the one affecting the whole of mankind. And inevitably, therefore, the Baha'i community, for never forget, we are part of the human race. We have to go through whatever the human race has to go through. We shall be affected by it and come out to the same glorious future as they will. That great challenge for mankind is now to become mature. The human race has come of age, and it has been given through the most great revelation of Baha'u'llah all the guidance, the powers, the knowledge, the vision which it needs to emerge, to transform from youth to maturity. This is the greatest crisis in any organic life. That is when in individual human beings or in animals or trees, they become what they're going to be for the rest of their lives. And now is the time when the human race has to decide and become what it is going to be for the rest of its history on the planet.
We are the Aymara, the Mayans, the Dutch, the Yoruba, the Cree, the Inuit. We are from Tuvalu, Spain, Luxembourg, Argentina, Zimbabwe, Suriname.
We are the Poles, the Greenlanders, the Pakistanis, the Bank Islanders, the Maori, the Andangme. We are Mexican, Apache, Comorian, Swedes, Tigray. We are from Botswana, South Africa, Papua New Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Ireland, Uzbekistan, Canada.
We are Germans, Sara, Guaymi, Somalis, Ekoi, Lebanese. We are the Babwa, the Babilis, the Tlingit, the people of Cameroon, the Oromo, the Haida, the Balante. We are Panamanians, Iroquois, Vietnamese, English. We are from Sikkim, Transkei, Andaman and Nicobar Islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, Honduras, New Caledonia and the Loyalty Islands, Rwanda, Vanuatu.
We are the Latvians, the Lakota, the Arapaho, the Yami, the Yo, the Bribri. We are Australian, Torres Strait Islanders, Salish, Pygmies, Nepalese, Mauritanians. We are from the Bahamas, Scotland, Argentina, Belize, Hungary, Kiribati.
We are the North Americans.
The South Americans.
The Asians.
The Australasians. The Europeans.
The Africans.
We are the people of the world.
When Abdu'l-Baha arrived in 1912, New York was fast becoming a symbol of the modern world. To him, its skyscrapers expressed an aspiration for progress that was typical of the technological age that was coming into being. Truly, it is a wonderful city, he said. New York has made such progress in material civilization. I hope that it may also advance spiritually in the kingdom and covenant of God. I have come for this. The city that welcomed Abdu'l-Baha was on the crest of a wave of optimism about the future. In the busy streets, the master saw a thriving society where everyone hurried to work. New York is a beehive, he said. At that time, 1,000 immigrants a day were streaming through the government reception center on Ellis Island. Most were spreading out across the continent to the mills and factories of the American heartland. Many, however, settled in Manhattan's Lower East Side, making it one of the most densely populated areas on Earth. To the companions of Abdu'l-Baha, it must have seemed as if representatives of all humanity were being drawn together in New York to hear his message. Abdu'l-Baha was attracted by America's interest in the cause of world peace. He had come to New York to speak at the Lake Mohonk Conference on International Arbitration. He believed that the most momentous question of the day was international peace. That a power was needed to prevent war and to proclaim the oneness of humanity. As the master arrived, the country was preparing for a federal election. Social reform was becoming a political issue of national dimensions. Across the country, wherever newspapers could reach, reform measures were being discussed. Abdu'l-Baha was a guest speaker at the 4th annual conference of the NAACP, where he shared the platform with Jane Addams, founder of Hull House in Chicago. As he crossed the continent, the master met with leaders of thought who were actively concerned with the needs of the time. Generally, confidence ran high that remedies for the ills of humankind could be found by advancing science and technology. In Abdu'l-Baha's view, what was needed to resolve the problems of an emerging global society was the union of scientific and moral development, of material and spiritual civilization. Spiritual consciousness is the generating force of human society, he said. Throughout his visit, Abdu'l-Baha addressed issues familiar to us as the major problems of this century. Since 1912, they have expanded in range and complexity. And demand for social action has become a way of life in our time. Abdu'l-Baha put the racist attitudes he found rooted in American culture in a global perspective. He warned that until those prejudices are entirely removed from the people of the world, humanity will not find rest. He saw problems like the extremes of wealth and poverty created by industrial society in an international context. The solution did not lie in the conflict of capital and labor. Fundamentally, the disease afflicting the body politic is lack of love and altruism. Abdu'l-Baha favored the empowerment of women through greater opportunity for education. Social and political progress will not be possible, he said, until man and woman recognize and realize equality. He called on the nations of the world to create an international tribunal to establish the cause of universal peace, because the spirit of the age demands peace. No power on earth can stand before it, he asserted. In 1912, Abdu'l-Baha had no illusions, however, about the impending crises facing humanity. He warned, "The earth is loaded with explosives and deadly instruments. Before long, these weapons of hell shall wreck the edifice of mankind." All the bloodshed of the past has been induced through religious or racial prejudice, or political or patriotic bias. After World War I, he wrote, "Movements newly born and worldwide in their range will exert their utmost for the advancement of their designs." At the same time, through the guidance of the Baha'i teachings, the Baha'is have brought into existence a global community, representative of the diversity of humankind and established in the most remote reaches of the earth. Its affairs are directed by an internationally elected body as conceived in the writings of Baha'u'llah and called the Universal House of Justice. As the revelation of God to our age transforms human consciousness, the political unification of our planet will be seen as a prelude to the fulfillment spoken of 100 years ago by Baha'u'llah. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come.
A tablet of great significance, described by Baha'u'llah as the rumbling of his proclamation to the kings and rulers of the world, was revealed in Adrianople and addressed to Nasruddin Shah of Persia. But it was sent to him from Akka. Its dispatch required a personal messenger, as it would have been impossible for the Shah to receive the tablet through any other channel. The person who was created anew and performed the sacred mission was a youth of 17 by the name of Akka Buzurg, entitled Badi. The father of Badi, Haji Abdul Majid Nishapuri, known as Aba Badi, was one of the outstanding believers of the Babi faith and later became a devoted follower of Baha'u'llah. Although Badi grew up in the home of a very devoted believer, he was not touched sufficiently by the spirit of the faith as to make him believe in the cause, and he remained cold and aloof in relation to it, until, during the visit to his home of a travelling teacher, Mullah Muhammadi Zarandi, Nabil-e-Azam, he listened to some verses from a long poem by Baha'u'llah and was so entranced that he devoted the balance of his life to serving him. After his conversation, he set out to visit Baha'u'llah, traveling on foot from Mosul to Akka. Badi arrived in Akka early in 1869. He wandered in the city for some time, not knowing the residence of his Lord or how to enter it. He went to a mosque, and there he sighted a few Persians, and he knew that the one standing in front of them was none other than Abdu'l-Baha. He waited till the prayer was finished and then approached the master with great reverence and handed him a note containing 2 lines of a poem he had hurriedly composed on the spot. In it, he had, without introducing himself, declared his loyalty to the master and his faith in Baha'u'llah in moving and tender language. Abdul Baha warmly welcomed Badi and managed to take him to the barracks. Badi was ushered into the presence of Baha'u'llah alone. Badi travelled on foot all the way to Tehran. On arrival in the summer of 1869, he discovered that the king was on a camping expedition. He made his way to the area and sat on top of a rock far away, but opposite the royal pavilion. There he sat for 3 days and 3 nights in a state of fasting and prayer, awaiting the passing of the royal escort. On the 4th day, the Shah, looking through his binoculars, spotted a man dressed in a white garb, sitting motionless and in a most respectful attitude on a rock opposite. He guessed that he had some demand to make for justice or was seeking help for his difficulties. He sent his men to find out who he was and what he wanted. Badi told them that he had a letter from a very important personage for the Shah and must hand it to him personally. The officers searched him and then brought him to the king. Calmly and courteously, he handed him the tablet and in a loud voice movingly called out the celebrated verse from the Quran. O King, I have come unto thee from Sheba with a weighty message. Badi was arrested. The Shah was taken aback by the courage and fearlessness of Baha'u'llah's messenger. He ordered his men to get from Badi, first through persuasion and promises, and then by torture if he refused to cooperate, the name of other Baha'is. The officer in charge was Kazim Khan. At first, Kazim Khan spoke to him kindly and gently. He said, "Give me a full account of all this. Who gave you this letter? From where have you brought it? How long ago was it? Who are your comrades?" Badi replied, "This letter was given to me in Akka by Hazrat Baha'u'llah. If you want Baha'is, they are numerous in Iran. And if you want my comrades, I was all alone and have none." The photograph of Badi, the Prince of Martyrs, with the rods of iron in the foreground, is the best testimony to the spirit of steadfastness and resignation, of calm and assurance, which his face portrays. For a space of 3 years, Baha'u'llah continued to extol in his writings the heroism of that youth, characterizing the references made by him to that sublime sacrifice.
The fundamentalist Muslim government in Iran has displayed an intense hatred of the Baha'is.
It is almost incredible to the West that pure religious fanaticism could flower so terribly in our day. This is an old enmity, an old hostility, which is really theological in its nature. The Shiite clergy believes that after Islam there cannot exist a valid religion. Therefore, almost by definition, the Baha'i faith must be a heresy and an evil movement.
Would the Iranian government consider protecting Baha'is if it felt they were in great danger?
You know, what do you mean by protection? To what extent?
Protection in the sense that in 1979 their holiest shrine was dismantled.
The shrine is not considered holy. We take it as a center of conspiracy. Very simple.
Members of the Baha'i faith say it's a question of genocide.
What one congressman called a case of religious genocide unique at this moment on this planet.
A number of Iran's government leaders belong to a society specifically directed at the extirpation of the Baha'i faith.
The ruling groups in Iran today are the same Islamic mullahs who persecuted this movement from its inception in the 19th century.
My father was a doctor, a physician. He was alone in his office.
My mother and the rest of the members of the National Assembly, they were in prison.
Revolutionary Guard, they offered my father, we say that you are Zoroastrian, and my father refused that. And so they executed.
Executed.
Thousands of them.
Do you consider Baha'is to be heretics?
It is not a religion. I told you, I consider it as a political, treacherous political movement, created primarily by the Russians, then supported strongly by the British, and now has the strong support of American media and foreign policy and everything.
Are they a threat to Islam?
No.
It is purely and simply religious fanaticism which causes this persecution, and they don't want the world to know it. In fact, in many cases where the Baha'is have been tortured and accused of being spies for Israel or spies for the United States, and yet they can go free if they merely sign a piece of paper saying that they are Muslims and they recant their Baha'i faith. Well, this is obviously the answer to the false charges.
If they're allowed to murder in the dark, the murders may never end. Women, children, and old people haven't been spared, and we're afraid that this will go on unless we take a very open public stand against it and draw the attention of the people of the world to what is happening in Iran.
Iranian authorities have launched a sweeping crackdown on its Baha'i community. According to media reports, as many as 100 people from the minority group have been either raped or arrested in the recent weeks. The Baha'is of Iran have been facing atrocities for decades now, but the recent crackdown has been focused on the village of Roshankoh in the Mazandaran province, a place where a large number of people from the community live. The government has sealed the village and has now deployed heavy earth-moving equipment to demolish homes. Reports further suggest that the Ibrahim Raisi government has blocked roads to the Roshankoh village. The local government agents have confiscated their mobile devices, prohibiting them from filming the government action. Authorities have reportedly demolished homes and have installed robust metal fences to restrict access to their own homes. And anyone who tried to challenge the authorities has now been arrested. Land confiscations, home demolitions, and intensified persecutions, they are not new to the Baha'i community. The largest minority community is not recognized by the Iranian authorities and is often subjected to abuse. They are also accused of backing Iran's archenemy, Israel. The Baha'i faith is a relatively modern monotheistic religion with spiritual roots dating back to the early 19th century in Iran. The community came into existence much before the inception of the Islamic Republic in 1979. With concerns growing over the crackdown, the U.S. State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom urged Iran to halt its ongoing oppression of the Baha'i community and honor its international obligations to respect the rights of all Iranians to freedom of religion or belief.
The year 1921 signifies an important transition in the evolution of the Baha'i faith. This was the year that Abdu'l-Baha left this earthly plane. Friends, the time is coming that I shall be no longer with you. I have done all that could be done. I have served the cause of Baha'u'llah to the utmost of my ability. I have laboured night and day all the years of my life. Oh, how I long to see the friends shouldering the responsibilities of the cause. Remember, whether or not I be on earth, my presence will be with you always. But who was this man that was loved and respected by so many, by rich and poor, Muslim and Christian, by the highest and lowest in society? What was it like to be in his presence? The famous Orientalist Edward Granville Brown, who met him in 1890, so described him.
Seldom have I seen one whose appearance impressed me more. A tall, strongly built man, holding himself straight as an arrow, with white turban and raiment, long black locks reaching almost to the shoulder, combined with an unswerving will, eyes keen as a hawk's, and strongly marked but pleasant features. Such was my first impression of Abbas Effendi, the master.
What kind of popularity was it that would cause, within a day of his passing, and in an age of limited communication, more than 10,000 to gather and mourn the one they knew as Abbas Effendi? Palestine had never seen such an outpouring of grief. The master was a father to the poor and a physician to the sick, an example and counselor to the high and mighty, and a loving brother to all who crossed his path. He was so loved, so admired, with qualities so extraordinary, that his own father, Baha'u'llah, considered him a marvel and titled him Sirullah, the mystery of God. But he himself insisted on simply being known as Abdu'l-Baha, the servant of Baha. His spiritual sensitivity, profound humility, and utter consecration for others were legendary. His own sister and mother often said that, if you are not watchful, he would give everything we possess away to others in need. On one such occasion, he tried to give away the rug under their feet, at which point his sister intervened, saying, "If you give this remaining rug away, You will have to give me away too.
Abdul-Baha, whose given name was Abbas, was born on May the 23rd, 1844, into an illustrious family in the city of Tehran in Persia, now Iran. On the very eve of his birth, miles away in the southern city of Shiraz, a young merchant named Ali Muhammad declared that he, the Bab, was the promised one whose return the Muslims had been expecting for some 1,300 years. The Bab's message heralding the day of him whom God shall make manifest struck a chord with people in Persia and attracted a broad spectrum of society to his faith. It also provoked opposition, leading to the persecution and death of tens of thousands of his followers, and culminating in the Bab's own martyrdom in 1850. At this time, Abdul-Baha was 6 years old.
His mother's name was Asiya Khanum, and his father, who in later years would become known as Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, was called Mirza Hussain Ali. Abbas had been named after his grandfather, Mirza Bozorg Nuri, a vizier in the court of the monarch Fath Ali Shah. His childhood had been privileged, and he had grown up in a beautiful mansion surrounded by gardens and orchards. His parents, mindful of their responsibilities, shared their wealth with the poor and needy, and Mirza Hussain Ali was widely known as the father of the poor. But all that was to change within a few short years. It was during those early years of his life and the Babi faith that the poet and heroine Tahireh was a guest under the roof of Baha'u'llah. He himself describes how she held him as a little boy on her lap and conversed with him. It was also during those early years that the historian Nabil Zarandi recounts how the little Abbas took his hand and accompanied him around his family home, showing him all the rooms. During the hot days of summer, he sometimes slept outside in his grandfather's garden and rode horses with his father in the cool, lush mountains. One day, before he was 8, Abbas went to visit shepherds who tended his father's sheep. They invited Abbas to share their meal. After they had eaten, the head shepherd told Abbas that it was the custom for a guest to leave a present for the shepherds. He thought for a while and then gave away all the sheep to them. When Baha'u'llah heard the news, he laughed and said that his son needed someone to watch over him, otherwise he might give himself away. The sibling closest to him was Bahiyeh, his younger sister by 3 years. In 1903, she provided a full account of their time spent together.
In August 1852, an attempt was made on the life of the Shah. The failed assassination by a deranged Babi youth caused an uproar in the city. All the followers of the Bab were targeted for reprisals, and the house of Baha'u'llah was sacked and looted.
There we gathered together some furniture, which had been left by the mob, and lived in one room destitute of all but the barest necessities.
Baha'u'llah, who took the brunt of the blame, was forced to walk from Nayavaran to Tehran, a distance of 15 miles. In the burning heat of a summer day, bareheaded, barefooted, and in chains, with crowds hurling stones and insults at him along the way. Together with 80 other Babis, Baha'u'llah was thrown into the infamous Siachal, the black pit of Tehran, with a chain around his neck infamous for its galling weight. The little boy had a deep longing to see his father. With the help of a friendly guard, he was carried into this dungeon on the shoulders of a servant. Down they went, down and still further down 2 flights of steps, until they reached a long, pitch-black corridor. The prison was a disused water cistern under the palace. The air was fetid, foul with stench, the darkness pitch. Some 150 souls, including thieves and assassins, were crowded in that hole. As Abdu'l-Baha explained at the very bottom, when he could see nothing, we heard his blessed voice, "Do not bring him here." And so we returned. Baha'u'llah, expecting imminent execution as leader of the Babis, was instead reserved for the more horrible suffering of witnessing the successive torture and death of his companions one after the other. To keep up their spirits, Baha'u'llah had his companions chant a refrain antiphonally throughout the night, one group singing, "God is sufficient unto me, He is the all-sufficing," and the other responding with, "In Him let the trusting trust." 140 years later, at the 1992 Baha'i World Congress in New York, some 30,000 participants heard that same chant re-echoing on the other side of the planet. Four months passed in this state of fearful agony. 4 months during which the government investigated Baha'u'llah's connection with the attack on the life of the Shah, and the family lived in suspense and terror.
According to Bahia Khanum, one day, in the course of these months, we found Abbas Effendi surrounded by a band of boys who had undertaken to personally molest him. He was standing in their midst, firmly but quietly commanding them not to lay their hands upon him, which, strange to say, they seemed unable to do. And it was during these 4 months, here in this vermin-infested dungeon, with his neck bowed down by chains, that Baha'u'llah received the first intimation of his mission. In that pitch-black, fetid darkness, a maiden appeared before him, imparting tidings of his station, communicating his spiritual sovereignty, announcing God's message for this day. Following his release months later, Bahia Khanum commented, "We saw a new radiance seeming to enfold him like a shining vesture. Its significance we were to learn years later." Although the government's investigation found no connection between Baha'u'llah and the attack on the life of the Shah, it decided to exile him and his family to Baghdad under strict military escort. The season was bitterly cold, and the route lay over mountains. The convoy moved with painful slowness, covering only several miles a day, so that the journey lasted 3 months. Baha'u'llah was very ill and weak. The chains had left his neck galled, raw and swollen. As Bahia Khanum later recalled, "We were all insufficiently clothed and suffered keenly from exposure. My brother in particular was very thinly clad, riding upon a horse, his feet, ankles, hands and wrists, much exposed to the cold, became frostbitten and swollen. The effects of this experience he feels to this day on being chilled or having a cold." We arrived in Baghdad in a state of great misery, Bahia Khanum later recorded, and also of almost utter destitution.
During these early years, Abbas Effendi had recognized the glory of his father's station and did everything possible to serve him. He also frequented the mosques and coffee houses at that time and debated with the doctors and learned men he met there. They were astonished at his knowledge and acumen. He came to be known among them as the youthful sage. They would ask him, "Who is your teacher? Where do you learn the things which you say?" His reply was that his father had taught him. Although he had never been to school, he was as proficient in all that was taught and more knowledgeable as a youth than most well-educated men. Those who knew him would often remark on his beauty, as his sister recalls.
In appearance, my brother was at this time a remarkably fine-looking youth.
During the years in Baghdad, Baha'u'llah's fame continued to grow, with streams of visitors from Iraq and further afield seeking his presence. His fame spread so far that the Persian authorities, aided by Baha'u'llah's jealous half-brother Mirza Yahya, brought pressure on the Ottoman Sultan for a further exile to Constantinople, present-day Istanbul. 12 days prior to his departure, in a garden he called Rezvan, or Paradise, amongst the roses and nightingales across the river Tigris, Baha'u'llah declared himself to be the one foretold by the Bab, the one whom God shall make manifest, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. That day, the 21st of April 1863, is celebrated annually by Baha'is worldwide as Rezvan, the most important festival of their faith. After a 12-day sojourn in the Garden of Rizwan on the 2nd of May 1863, Baha'u'llah's second banishment began a decade after his exile from Persia.
Abdu'l-Baha, forewarned of his father's station, had immediately taken the role of special attendant, servant, and bodyguard for him. During the journey to Constantinople, he watched over him day and night, riding by his wagon and guarding close by his tent when he was resting. In order to get a little sleep himself, after first reassuring himself of his father's well-being, he adopted the plan of riding fast ahead of the caravan and then dismounting at a considerable distance away. He would then make his horse lie down, and with his head on his horse's neck, would sleep a little until the cavalcade reached them, at which point his horse would kick him and he would wake up and remount. Bahia Khanum described his routine. Every night he was the first to arrive at the campsite and arrange for food and water, then stayed up all night looking for further fresh supplies.
They reached Constantinople by mid-August, and Baha'u'llah was received with much deference and respect. But by December, only 4 months later, a further exile took place, instigated by his ill-wishers. This time he was banished to the furthermost corner of Turkey, to the city of Adrianople, modern-day Edirne. Here they spent a miserable winter surviving on bare necessities, and here too Abbas Effendi did his utmost to protect his father from Mirza Yahya. The machinations of Baha'u'llah's jealous half-brother had now taken a more somber turn. He was plotting against Baha'u'llah's life and finally poisoned his food. The attempt was almost fatal. Filled with grief, Abbas put his head on Baha'u'llah's pillow and begged him to live. Though his father could not speak, he laid his hand gently on Abbas's head. Baha'u'llah did recover, but his hand shook forever after because of the poison, and it affected his handwriting.
During his time in Adrianople, Abbas Effendi mingled with men of all religious backgrounds and endeared himself to high and low alike. Even the governor became a friend and delighted to listen to his discourse. It was from this time that he began to be called the Master. When the governor received the Sultan's order in 1868 of sending the exiles still further and banishing Baha'u'llah from Adrianople, Bahia Khanum writes that he was so affected by it that, not having the heart to execute it himself, he put it into the hands of his subordinates, wrote a letter to Abbas Effendi and left the city. One day, unexpectedly, a cordon of soldiers surrounded the residence of Baha'u'llah. A bugle was sounded, and Abbas Effendi was handed the governor's letter. Stunned by the edict, which imposed banishment on the exiles to different places, he responded that "we would rather die than be separated." The commanding officer retorted that they would all go that same day and would be forcibly parted. But Abbas Effendi demanded to see the representative of the governor. He insisted that a telegraph be sent to Constantinople, appealing for a common banishment at the very least. The reply was negative, but Abbas Effendi remained resolute. He refused to take no for an answer and continued to send more dispatches to the capital, eloquently pleading their case. The family was in turmoil. The master seemed to be making no headway. Would they have to be scattered and separated from their beloved Baha'u'llah? Finally, Abbas Effendi demanded the presence of the governor, who in the meanwhile had returned to the city. When he came and saw the state they were in, he communicated to Sultan Abdul Aziz himself. "It is impossible," he wrote. "We cannot separate these people." The next day, a reply came, granting permission for the entire family of Baha'u'llah and his followers to leave all together. But no one knew where they were to be sent.
ای حضرت عبدالبها، ای بانی بیت خدا، ای مرکز عهد بها، دستم بگیر دستم بگیر عبدالبها احسان بکن جان مرا قربان بکن قربان گیسوان بکن دستم بگیر عبدالبها دستم
What would happen if there was a full-scale nuclear war between Russia and the United States? Based on non-classified data, the aftermath might go something like this. When one side launches nuclear missiles, the other side detects them and fires back before impact. U.S. submarine-launched ballistic missiles from west of Norway start striking Russia after about 10 minutes, and Russian ones from north of Canada start hitting the U.S. a few minutes later. The very first strikes are high-altitude EMP attacks, frying electronics and power grids by creating an electromagnetic pulse of tens of thousands of volts per meter. The next strikes target command and control, as well as nuclear launch facilities. Land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles take about half an hour to arrive. Major cities are targeted, both because they contain military facilities and to stymie the enemy's post-war recovery. Some cruise missiles take hours to reach their target. Each impact creates a fireball about as hot as the core of the sun, followed by a radioactive mushroom cloud. These intense explosions vaporize people nearby and cause fires and blindness further away. The fireball expansion then causes a blast wave that damages buildings, crushing nearby ones. The United Kingdom and France have nuclear capabilities and are obliged by NATO's Article 5 to defend the US. So Russia hits them too. Firestorms engulf many cities, where storm-level winds fan the flames, igniting anything that can burn, melting glass and some metals, and turning asphalt into flammable hot liquid. But the explosions, the electromagnetic pulse, and the radioactivity aren't the worst part. Nuclear winter is, caused by the black carbon smoke from the nuclear firestorms. The Hiroshima atomic bomb caused such a firestorm, but today's hydrogen bombs are much more powerful. A large city like Moscow, with almost 50 times more people, can create much more smoke. And a firestorm sends plumes of black smoke up into the stratosphere, far above any rain clouds that would otherwise wash out the smoke. This black smoke gets heated by sunlight, lofting it like a hot air balloon for up to a decade. High-altitude jet streams are so fast that it takes only a few days for the smoke to spread across much of the northern hemisphere. In the meantime, Earth gets freezing cold, even during the summer, with farmland in Kansas cooling by about 20 degrees centigrade or 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and other regions cooling almost twice as much. A recent scientific paper estimates that over 5 billion people could starve to death, including around 99% of those in the United States, Europe, Russia, and China. We obviously don't know how many people will survive a nuclear war. But if it's even remotely as bad as scientists think, then it has no winners, merely losers.